We have some great news coming out of Iraq. Not something you hear often, but ISIS has been defeated in Mosul, which is, of course, the second largest city in Iraq. So let's watch a short video on this from the Washington Post.
The fall of Mosul in early June 2014 was sudden and unexpected. Islamic State fighters overran a military checkpoint in early June. Within a week, Iraq's second largest city was under ISIS control. At the Al-Nuri Mosque, ISIS leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi declared himself the leader of a new Islamic State. During their brutal rule, ISIS executed thousands of people. Cell phones and satellite dishes were banned, and residents were blocked from leaving the city. It took more than 2 years for Iraq to be ready to retake its second city. In mid-October 2016, the fight for Mosul began. ISIS was ready. Roads were lined with explosives, snipers fired from rooftops, and wave after wave of car bombing slowed down Iraqi troops. It took 100 days for them to recapture the eastern part of the city. As Iraqi forces moved west, they fought house to house and block to block. It would take another 5 months to finish the fight. During the course of the fighting, nearly 900,000 civilians were forced to flee their homes.
We left everything, our homes and belongings. Life under the Islamic State was bad. They treated us poorly. No one had any money. We are taking our children to the camps so we can live.
Many spent months in dirty, overcrowded camps with food and medicine in short supply. But at least they were safe. As many as 100,000 people couldn't get out. Militants gunned down men, women, and children in the street as they tried to flee. In March, a U.S. airstrike killed more than 100 civilians. No one knows the total number of civilians killed in the fight for Mosul. Finally, in mid-June, Iraqi forces reached Mosul's old city, battling the last ISIS holdouts in narrow, snaking alleys. ISIS blew up the minaret of the Al-Nuri Mosque, where Baghdadi had declared the creation of his own Islamic State. Iraq's prime minister said it signaled the defeat of ISIS was near. The fight may be over in Mosul, but much of the city is in ruins. Its main bridges are destroyed, so are its airport, its railway station, and its university. Iraqi officials say it will take years and billions of dollars to rebuild.
So this is clearly amazing news to hear that ISIS has been defeated in Iraq's second largest city. I mean, people are forgetting, I think it was about 2 years ago when ISIS first took all of this territory. It seemingly happened out of nowhere, and they held a lot of territory. I mean, they still hold a decent amount of territory, but they've been beaten back in certain areas of Iraq, including in Mosul, and that's a great sign. Now, the downside of this, though, is, and I know it's crazy to say that there's a downside to defeating ISIS, but what's happened when ISIS has lost pretty large swaths of territory is they turn more to traditional terrorism tactics. So when they conquered territory, that's more of like guerrilla army tactics. Conquer territory, hold territory. That's like a guerrilla army. Terrorist tactics are terrorism. Well, you and I know, okay, you go into a crowded theater and blow yourself up or something like that. So there seems to be a trend of an uptick in terrorist attacks when they get defeated on the battlefield and lose swaths of territory. So, you have to have intelligence agencies and police being very vigilant at times like now, because ISIS won't take this sitting down. They want to strike back in one way or another. And understand, Iraq has been in a horrific situation for a very long time now. I mean, story after story after story would come out where there are Shia strongholds in Iraq that would just see suicide bombings relentlessly all the time. So there might be an uptick there. There might be an uptick, in the West. Again, it seems to track in a fairly predictable way where ISIS loses on the battlefield, then they start doing terrorist attacks not only in Iraq, but also, in Europe and elsewhere. So that's the only potential downside of this. But there's also a lesson to be learned as to how ISIS was defeated here, which is, I don't know if you noticed in the story, but who successfully took back Mosul? The people of Iraq. The Iraqi army took it back. Now, we should take a lesson from that perhaps the best way to defeat ISIS is to rely on the people in the region who are most directly threatened by ISIS on the ground. So, we've had this approach where we want to get more involved, and we do drone strikes, and we do traditional airstrikes, and we still, of course, have the full-scale wars going on in Iraq and Afghanistan. And those are seemingly endless wars, and they haven't made anything better. They've made things worse, and they've made the U.S. more of a target. Well, here we learned that it was the Iraqi army that effectively got their shit together and took back the territory. And the reason I say got their shit together is because 2 years ago, they didn't have their shit together. There was that famous story about how they literally dropped their weapons and ran when they saw ISIS coming. Well, now they're clearly stronger, and they were able to defeat ISIS. So I think that's the model that needs to be used moving forward. So like in Syria, for example, it shouldn't be the U.S. getting involved and, bombing and doing all this stuff. And it shouldn't be Russia either, by the way. Russia, of course, is fighting on the side of the Syrian government. It should be the Syrian army should be fighting ISIS, and they are, but those should be the ones that are relied upon to defeat ISIS. And this goes for every region. So the Kurds have been a very active fighting force on the ground against ISIS. Yes, rely on them to do it because they are the ones who are directly threatened by ISIS right now on the ground. So the fact that the U.S. feels the need to get involved and we're going to go here, and we're going to go there, we're going to drone, and we're going to do airstrikes. Well, the results are, again, you heard it right there in that short clip. They said, oops, the U.S. did an airstrike. They killed 100 civilians recently. So this is our contribution. Every now and then we pop in and hurt the people who are fighting ISIS. And this isn't just the case in Iraq, which is what they were describing there, but it's also the case in Syria. We've discussed countless stories how, whoops, look at that. We killed, some troops who were aligned with the Syrian government who were fighting ISIS. Over and over and over, we've read those stories to the point where it looks like they're doing it on purpose. So just get out. Just get out. Get out. If the U.S. wants to give people in the fight against ISIS, to be specific, not anybody else, but in the fight against ISIS, we want to lend logistical support, that's one thing. We want to lend humanitarian support, that's one thing. But once you start getting involved and start shooting at shit when there's no direct threat to us, that's just stepping the line. And I haven't even brought up the financial aspect of it, which is we're wasting a tremendous amount of money in overseas conflicts that we have no business being in. So, but we have to celebrate this news because this is great news. But again, it was a victory for the Iraqi army taking back Mosul. And, these various forces around the world who are directly threatened by ISIS can take care of it. If you want to give them logistical support and humanitarian support, okay, but the U.S. really should stop getting directly involved in these things because we've been doing it since 2001, and it hasn't made things better. It's made things worse. So I think there are a few lessons to be taken away from this, but it's good times to hear that ISIS has been effectively obliterated in Mosul.